Senegal's President Mackey Sall has indefinitely postponed the presidential election scheduled for February 25, 2024. And speaking to the nation on national television, President Sall says he postpones the election because of disputes over candidates' list. He says his action is to ensure credible, free and fair elections. The opposition party, PASTEF, has deployed their action, calling it a constitutional coup. The leadership of ECOWAS has responded to the postponement, expressing concern at the circumstances that led to the postponement and urging the president to fix a new date for election. What does the development mean? And to discuss this is Arise analyst, associate professor of law, Sam Amadi. Very warm welcome to Newsnight. Well, a lot of people, the main opposition, Senegalese Democratic Party, had condemned the postponement. They've described it as unprecedented. It has never happened before. ECOWAS is quickly stepping in to avoid any constitutional crisis, you understand, like the exited Sahelian nations, although that was a result of a coup. But any crisis that is going to affect its members, again, politically or socially, seems to, worry the Commission.
I think it's really a bad timing. First, we've just going through the notice of
postponement.
No, the notice of even removal withdrawal from ECOWAS by the three Sahelian countries who incidentally speak French. So it looks like there's a French phenomenon
connection
in the West African tragedy.
Have they been subjugated for too long?
It might be that the dimension of French, the extra hard French colonization and its alienation in the conquest of...
but the French said it was, what did they call their policy again?
Instead of our what do you call it?
Direct and indirect system.
So they adopt the direct system where they are French citizens. But again, it creates a sense of alienation and maybe increases the crisis. But the key point here is that Sall wanted to run again.
Assimilation.
He wanted to continue. And he grudgingly got himself off. Now, the issue is indefinite suspension, number one. So it's not clear, like SDP has argued, whether what happens to the tenure if the election...
Which ends in April.
So if you don't do the election...
Conduct the election now.
So one allegation is that maybe this is a fiction to continue in power. The other is, so some of his enemies think that maybe there's an overwhelming rejection of his government, and so the chances are that the opposition might win this election. And so the thinking is maybe this is a way of holding back, truncating, and then holding back and hoping that the tide, somehow just shift. Either way, it's a bad time for Senegal. The economy is not doing very well. There's some degree of political disaffection and restiveness going on there. And if you map it back to the West African crisis, the question is, on one side we're talking about outright coups. The other side we're talking about constitutional, quote-unquote, coups. We're talking about lack of clarity and decisiveness with elections. And if you look at the VENDEM, which is the World Authoritative Report on Democracy, West African countries are struggling with quality of first elections are disputed. Already this is building towards a disputed election, allegations, lack of credibility in the electoral system, clear coups, truncating democracy, even the so-called facial. And,
I'm surprised you're not talking about the asphyxiation that pervades the entire region now.
That builds back to the loss of the authoritarian, what they now call electoral autocracy, which means even where elections hold, they're not democratic. Either the opposition party is heckled, the civic space is shrunk, the freedoms are less and less, getting less and less. even there's no competitive election because people are no longer, the democracy quotient measured in terms of quota of election, in terms of substantive freedom, in terms of respect for rule of law or fundamental provisions of the constitution, we're seeing less and less of that. And the real crisis is this. This is also the center of poverty. You know, if you look at African poverty map, West Africa is basically the poverty belt, in the sense that if you look at Chad, Mali, Niger, all these areas, if you compare with Central Africa or compare with Southern Africa or compare with even North Africa, that's almost like an outlier. So how do you manage, and also with Sahel and the Gulf of Guinea, you get escalated security concerns. So the mixture of failing democratic institutions, rise of authoritarian politics, whether in terms of the guise of postponed elections or wanting to succeed yourself or holding very terrible elections, plus poverty, encroaching poverty, declining economic growth. So this is like a perfect storm, all building. And so the question is, if you look at ECOWAS statement, first they sounded like a little bit concerned. Now they now said, we are worried about, you know, the prospect. Please, we need timely, you know, new dates for election. So ECOWAS is now going to fall into the allegation by Mali and Burkina Faso. Look, you guys are talking about coups, military takeover. You're not really serious about democracy and what it requires. So the question is it this lack of commitment to clear, transparent democratic process that is feeding back into the rise of, you know, coups, especially in the French-speaking Africa?
So, I mean, you've mentioned coups there now, but very quickly, what will be the consequences if Sall stalls in office, even after the expiration of his constitutionally guaranteed tenure and the rest?
First, is there going to be a clear constitutional crisis? I mean, he has to leave office, there are no succession. So what happens? And that fits into maybe this is a strategic bargain to remain in power and invoke some kind of emergency power or extra constitutional means. That would be big crisis, a letdown in Senegal. I mean, Senegal has in the past really tried to...
How can ECOWAS come in here?
Well, ECOWAS has to also, if ECOWAS is serious and sincere about, you know, protect democracy, then they have to deploy that and insist right now that election happens within a space in which it will be enough to have a transition. I mean, if you don't do that now, then you are creating by default the constitutional crisis that he will remain in power, and that would damage ECOWAS' pretension.
And that will not be seen as interference by ECOWAS. Well,
if ECOWAS is going to interfere in Mali, where unconstitutional usurpation of power happens, then overstaying the tenure in a deliberate ploy, it's also unconstitutional. So I think the best is to put pressure to ensure that two things happen. First, get a clear date, enough time for transition. No, if you're talking about the candidate list, it can be resolved. It's true that SDP, the other party, PANTEF, you know, petitioned that its candidate was let off.
Yeah.
It brings a question: why do you have processes that are not credible that leads to either
they've used the court processes to knock off some strong candidates.
And so this is really a tragedy, and Senegal is critical to West Africa, considering its historic importance, its significant economic strength, and of course its cultural value. So I think that's a place to watch as to whether West Africa will get out of this incubus of unconstitutional governance and get back to democracy. And Senegal is a place to watch.
All right. Senegal is indeed a place to watch. Associate Professor of Law, Saman Amadi, Arise analyst. Okay.